give folks a moment or two to trickle in. But for those of you who I may not have yet met or maybe new to Love Your Brain, my name is Kyla Pierce. My pronouns are she and her. I oversee our programs and research, and I'm just delighted to have Dr. Kong here to guide us through an investigation of the neuroscience of compassion and why it matters in particular after brain injury. If you have never been to one of these events at Love Your Brain, these are really designed to bring experts from different aspects of holistic healing after brain injury to have a conversation that blends science and questions and is kind of a rich space of learning and reflection to help anyone impacted by brain injury, caregivers, as well as people with lived experience, clinicians, as well as yoga meditation teachers, learn really practical ways of approaching the healing process. Love Your Brain is a national nonprofit. Our mission is to improve the mental, physical, and social well-being of people with brain injury and caregivers. And our learning labs are one of the resources that we feel kind of helps disseminate important information. So we have a wonderful presentation ahead of us. I'm going to give some very brief housekeeping just so that there's no kind of confusion. One thing is we will keep people on mute to limit crosstalk, but if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. I will be monitoring that and as well as other people on my team, so feel free to ask any questions that you might have. We will have a designated Q&A time at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll just collect them and make sure that we can address them at the end. And if you are watching by YouTube, we have a slight delay, so just a little heads up there. All right. Well, without further ado, we'll introduce Dr. Yuna Kong, who is the director of Compassion and the Compassion and Wellbeing Lab and assistant professor of psychology and prevention sciences at Rutgers University, Camden. Dr. Kong's research explores how compassion shapes well-being and social connection, and how evidence-based interventions, including digital and mobile tools, can help compassion spread through communities. Her work draws from psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science to better understand wellness, loneliness, sleep, physical activity, and resilience. I recently was introduced to Dr. Kong through a Love Your Brain community member who spoke so highly of Dr. Kong's research in compassion and have just been deeply inspired by hearing about her vision for how to support people to learn how to be more gentle and kinder to ourselves, which, especially after such life-changing experiences of brain injury, which of course brings a lot of adversity, feels even more potent and critical. So we'll hand it over to you, Dr. Kong, and we'll be here to support as the event goes on. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to meet you all, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity to share this 60, 75 minutes of our life together. Um, we are having a thunderstorm in this side of the world. I don't know if you hear the sound of the rain. Okay, that's great because it's deafening on my side. Seems like the Zoom is doing a really good job filtering that out. Yes, so a brief introduction of myself. Again, my name is Yuna. I'm a psychologist and a neuroscientist, and I study things like compassion, kindness, and mindfulness. And I use these approaches and techniques to help improve people's health and well-being. As Kyla mentioned, I was introduced to this Love Your Brain Foundation by a member who I believe is joining here. I'd love to see if she's around, but I'm so thankful that she did, because when we were having a conversation, our initial connection was that we're both interested in compassion and kindness. And then I realized we also have a connection, which is that we both have history of brain injuries. When she brought the idea up where she suggested that maybe we can help people who are going through brain injury related symptoms. Uh, Maybe we can help them with these strategies like compassion and kindness. Um, so I'm just so thankful to be invited here and to be connecting with you all. I think it would be really nice to us. It is 6 p.m. on this side, but for many of you, you're probably sort of winding down. So maybe to increase a little bit of focus and also um, sort of think about how we want to, what kind of our intention that we want to pursue throughout this workshop. We can have 1 or 2 minutes of quick mindfulness meditation. So if you're already familiar with this type of focused attention mindfulness meditation, for you to just jump right in and start meditating. If not, I'm gonna walk you through a very brief version of this. Okay, so let's find a comfortable position. Normally, you want to have a straight back where your back is sort of stacked up. You can sort of sway back and forth and find the spot where you feel like you're stacked up and supported. You can close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or you can have a soft gaze, whatever works for you. And take a deep breath in, out. Now breathe naturally. Drop everything that you brought in to this room and just focus on your breathing. Maybe you can pay attention to the tip of your nose and notice that sort of becomes colder when you inhale and warmer when you exhale. Can also pay attention to your belly, the rise and falls of your belly. We're here. Okay, when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Right, so we are here. Now I'm gonna share my screen and start talking about neuroscience of compassion. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. Okay, so this is our plans. These are the topics that we want to be covering today. We're going to talk about the idea of self-compassion and self-love. And this will inevitably involve thinking about the idea of self and also what compassion is and what it involves. We're going to talk about neural basis of compassion and love. We're going to talk about how brain injuries may change the way that we view ourselves. You know, it may increase self-criticism, and we're going to talk about the importance of having unconditional self-love throughout this process. And throughout the whole workshop, I want to introduce you to some of these recent studies on compassion and loving kindness. And we're going to do some compassion building activity, brief ones and a little longer ones at the end. So before we start, I want to first establish the foundation. And I think this is really important. For the next few minutes, you're going to learn a lot about sort of the knowledge-based facts. And we're going to do some practice as well. But if you don't have a strong foundation, then all this knowledge or skills that you build upon them can be precarious. So I want to really make sure that we have a strong foundation. So I like to call this compassion circle activity. So I encourage you to sort of do this along with me. So I want you to think about some aspects of yourself that you like. So, think about certain adjectives that describe you that really make you feel happy that you have that. So, adjectives like warm, open, curious, resilient. So think about those adjectives floating around in your visual field. Um, I also want you to think about some aspects of yourself that you do not like. So, it can be anything. You don't have to think too hard about it, but think about certain aspects that you would rather not think about, you want to avoid. You might be defensive or critical or negative or anxious, all that. And I want you to sort of visualize a big circle that encompasses all these adjectives, that sort of encompasses and includes all these aspects of yourself that you like and don't like, and sort of have a mental note writing compassion there. So that is really the foundation of compassion. Compassion is about embracing our full humanity. It's not about just, like cherry picking this beautiful and wonderful aspects of myself and avoiding the parts that we don't like. But if you think about it, our usual tendency is that we don't like to confront some of the aspects that we don't like about us. And I think the fear is that I may think that if I acknowledge that part of myself, then I sort of become that. It becomes a fact. But if you think about it, if you're running away from something, that something is controlling you. So ironically, running away prevents us from growing. So here, when I talk about embracing, creating this circle of compassion, what I do not mean is that we do not grow. What I mean instead is that that kind of growing happens almost as a side effect of this embrace. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go. We're going to talk about what compassion is and what compassion is not, and it's going to come up there as well. But again, this is one of the reasons why compassion is a very difficult thing to do, especially if you have a lot of repressed tendency to not want to look at some aspects of yourself. So you need a lot of courage, and hopefully by the end of this workshop, you would have a little more courage to face that. So having established that foundation, let's talk about what we mean by compassion. So there are different definitions, and I think people generally have a sort of intuitive understanding as to what compassion is, right? Like most of us would respond to a child that's crying. You'd be like, "Oh my God, how can I help you?" You would run, towards the child to help. Many of us probably cared about some random strangers in faraway countries. Even though you really don't know this person, you have no direct relationship, this person being happy and healthy and safe has nothing to do with my interest, and yet you so deeply care about these people and you want them to be well and safe. That's sort of what we mean by compassion here. Compassion is this genuine concern that we have for the health, well-being, and safety of others. And very importantly, the desire and drive to help alleviate their pain and suffering. You want this pain and suffering for these people to go away. And if you think about it, this is really an astounding ability that we have, being able to care for one another, regardless of my relationship with that person, regardless of whether me helping them is gonna result in any kind of benefit on my side. Evolutionarily, this is a very interesting and unique ability that humans have. And here's the quote about compassion by the Dalai Lama. He said, "World peace must develop from inner peace. Peace is not just mere absence of violence. Peace, I think, is the manifestation of human compassion." right? So when we think about compassion, one of the misconception is that compassion is weak. People can take advantage of you if you're compassionate and kind. But really, compassion is one of the strongest strength that we have as humans. And I think compassion really starts with this awareness of suffering. When we did that compassion circle activity, that your courage to care about the part that have relationship with the parts of you that you may not like, your courage to face some aspects of the world that you would rather not see, your courage to sort of look at the suffering in the eye. That is really this kind of awareness is the starting point to something like world peace. So it is a very strong force that all of us are capable of having. There are different variations of compassion. And today we're going to be talking about mainly two types of experiences. This includes compassion and loving kindness. These are concepts that are derived from Buddhist texts, but of course, this is a universal human experience. So in Sanskrit or Pali, compassion is karuna. This has a lot of focus on suffering. So you think about someone who's going through a difficult time. And here, the suffering doesn't mean that this person is in mortal danger or in deep, deep darkness. It can be anything. It can be little annoyance, any kind of unpleasant experience that can occur just because we are human being. As part of being a human, is defined as suffering. So compassion or karuna is more about focused on suffering and the desire to alleviate the suffering, either in me or in other people. Loving kindness is metta. So this has more focus on thriving, and you have well wishes for other people to have the best version of life that they can have, and you have very genuine care and concern for their person that they're thriving and well-being. And sometimes from my own experience working with people, sometimes people report that loving kindness is sometimes harder than compassion, especially when this is when you yourself are in a very dark place or difficult place. It's difficult to wish other people well. So maybe it's more of a reflection of your current state sometimes. So I think it's like a mirror or sort of litmus test that you can do for yourself. In which case, which we can do this practice later again. If it becomes harder for you to well other people well, then we don't force it. And traditionally, and a lot of you guys, I think, have done meditation probably more than I have. And I think the importance there is to sort of have a curiosity about, oh, like that's curious. Why do I feel that way? And sort of note that and move on. Note that and move on. That's sort of the guidance that we tend to give. So, having established the definitions and the distinction between compassion and loving kindness, let's talk about some of the neuroscientific findings that we have so far. So, when we think about the subjective experience of compassion and love, I think there's a certain feeling that it feels like these kind of experiences happen outside our body, right? It feels like it's like there's some certain intuitive dualism about it, where it feels like compassion is something that sort of travels across the room. It's something that happens outside the brain. Which might be true. We don't know yet. There's a lot of consciousness research that's happening now, and people don't know. But a lot of research that we know in neuroscience and psychology tells us that these type of really complex experiences still have relationships to what's happening in your brain. Doesn't matter how complex the experience is, you can always map that experience in the brain. There is that relationship. Does one cause the other? We don't know. But there is that correlation when people are experiencing compassion or love, when we look at and we look at their brain, there are some systematic patterns that happen. So, in terms of the neuroscience of compassion, which is a very nascent field, but I think there are so far largely three systems that we are paying attention that we've found so far. So I'm going to go over them one at a time. And again, I know some of you, there's a lot of information here and lots of text. If that's causing you any kind of dizziness or nausea, feel free to just, turn off the video, take a bio break, whatever, and you can always come back to me and I'll explain again during Q&A. So please feel free to do what's best for you. So the first system that we in the brain that we focused on was threat-related processing. And I think it's really what's really fascinating about compassion is that it's an approach response. And I think it's fascinating because imagine that someone is in pain or someone's suffering. It often signals a potential source of threat, right? Maybe they're hurt in some way, maybe they're ostracized, so there could be a social threat to them. And that kind of threat, physical or social or emotional, that can also cause harm to me. So if someone's suffering, whatever caused that the person to suffer can also cause me to suffer, right? So evolutionarily, it kind of doesn't make sense to approach these people, at least at the individual level. But when we are moved by compassion, we're really motivated to go like to approach this person instead of running the other way. And you probably would recall some of the bravest and most courageous actions that's been done are really moved and motivated by compassion. So we were really curious about this tendency. So what we did in our lab was that we looked at we asked people how important that they thought compassion was in their lives. So that's what we see on the x-axis. So one means, hey, I don't think compassion is important at all to me. Eight is yes, compassion is very, very important to me. We also look at their brain, and these are three regions of the brain that tends to show up when people feel threatened. So when people see images of scary things or any kind of psychological threat, these regions, amygdala, anterior insula, this is sort of the map of threat that you combine all these regions together. So these are the regions that tend to show up when people are like, oh my God, I feel threatened. And those numbers are indicated on the y-axis. And what we are seeing is that you see the line sort of going down. That means that people who have higher sense of importance, people who believe that compassion is important more, they tend to show lower activity within these brain regions that are associated with threat. In other words, it seems that if you think compassion is an important value, then you may also experience less threat in response to psychological threats. Does that make sense to people? Right, I'm seeing some notes. Kyla, do I ask people questions in the middle or do I not open up?
You absolutely can. And feel
Okay.
free to invite people to comment in the chat, or if you want to pause and have some conversation, feel free.
Perfect. So I'm just gonna go over the next two neural regions and then maybe I'll open up for some questions. All right, so, what is this? Do you see this blue note, regions of, is it just me or do people see this? Oh, how did that happen? Okay, it just showed up and I don't know why it's on it. But if it doesn't bother people, it doesn't bother me. So we also had people come into the lab and put them in the fMRI scanner and had them do loving kindness meditation. So in this case, we had people think about different groups of people and then wish them well. So you may think about everyone in the world, may you live with ease. And then we compared your brain activity while you're making these well wishes to others to the brain activity when you're thinking about something else, doing laundry, right? So that way we can really isolate the part of the brain that's active when you are making well wishes for other people. Okay, so this is like a very brief way of saying this, but basically, these are the brain regions that are uniquely active when you're making well wishes for other people. And we got a very selective effect, meaning there are not that many clusters that we found. The strongest signals showed up in the brain's reward system. So these are the brain regions, sort of right here. These are the brain regions that are active when people receive reward, like money, chocolate, when you're hanging out with your best buddies. Basically, when you feel good, these brain tend to show up very robustly. So this is consistent with the idea that loving kindness or compassion might be a really pleasant experience. And some of you guys may be like, oh, do you need to do neuroimaging studies to know that? Of course, this is a, positive experience for a lot of people. Even when you are recognizing other people's suffering and your heart is aching, I think there's some sense of a wholesomeness, right? It's not that you're happy because this person is suffering. It's really the opposite of it. But there's this sense of like wholesome. This is like a right feeling to feel when you are suffering with another person. And another cluster that we found that was really interesting was this one. It's called right temporoparietal junction, or TPJ. And this is interesting because um, this is a brain region that is very uniquely implicated in a process called mentalizing. So mentalizing is when you are thinking about what other people are thinking about. So here, if I'm thinking about, hey, like what is Sue thinking? What is Katrina thinking? Like I'm thinking about other people's mental processes and feelings and thoughts. When I'm thinking about other people's mental processes, that's when this region tends to show up very strongly. So this is again consistent with the idea that loving kindness or compassion for others involves really putting yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see things from their perspective, from where they're standing. And this might be a process that is necessary when you're thinking about, oh, like I want, may Kyla be well. And then when you're thinking about that, you're really not thinking about your own interest or what you want. You're really thinking about what Kyla would want. So I think that kind of mentalizing process is naturally occurring when you're wishing someone else's to be well. And interestingly, again, this is a very complex looking plot, but really it's a simple idea. So I just mentioned that brain region that has to do with mentalizing. The degree of activity is on the x-axis. So higher activity means greater mentalizing related processing in your brain. So the more people mentalized, what we saw is that the y-axis is negative bias against stigmatized groups. We tend to have biases against some groups in our society. In this case, this was people who use controlled substances. And in a previous study, I looked at people's bias against people who are unhoused or experiencing homelessness. So higher number here is it means that you have more negative attitudes towards them. You think about them and you have this negative tendency. What we found is that if you mentalize more, if you engage in this perspective taking activity more while meditating, then you had lower bias against these people. So this is some of the studies that I've done before. The more people do compassion and loving kindness meditation, they showed less bias against the members of our society that are typically stigmatized very heavily. So that is what we know so far. There are some other that I want to cover more, but do people have any questions so far about these findings? I'm seeing some notes on the chat on the graphs of compassion versus threat Is there a limit? By that, I mean, if you increase compassion on the x-axis, do we eventually feel zero threat? Interesting. Or is there asymptom? I don't know that word. Does the trend line ever cross? So that's really interesting. So the question is, here, it can be confusing because it's a regression line, meaning it's just showing predicted line. This is not, so the real data looks more like this. There are like lots of dots where each dot is a person. And that line is basically a predictive model that, hey, if you look at the entire population and say they have a score of minus zero point 0.2, then the likelihood of them having about 0.1 of this score is the greatest, right? So it's sort of a predictive line, that's regression line that we have. So here, the real data has lots of dots here. And the question is, hey, if you go to if you increase compassion, like intimately, like maximally, does that, like, can you theoretically extinguish fear completely? Now, in real life, in our data, there's always variation. So I can't say, yeah, like if you have ultimate compassion, you have zero fear. I'm not sure, but theoretically and also anecdotally, you would agree that people with a lot of compassion tend to be also fearless. But I would say it's also not domain general, meaning, for example, I can be very brave when it comes to my children, but I can be probably less brave when it comes to other people. And even my husband, I think I'll be more brave when it comes to my children than my husband. Um, so that kind of threat response, I don't think it applies to all domains of your life. It might be more or less specific to the target that we're talking about. Any other questions? Let's see. I wonder if I can see. Oh, there you go. There are lots of other questions. What if have less compassion after injury, feel a sort of separation? Yes, that is very important. We're gonna definitely talk about that. I think in this case, um, what's really important to think about self-compassion and self-love. And that capacity that you cultivate by having self-compassion can naturally spill over to compassion for other people. That's sort of the general consensus in the literature now. Before, we used to think of them sort of separate, self-compassion, other compassion. Now we agree that the kind of capacity that you cultivate during self-compassion practice also is the same kind of brain regions and skills that you cultivate for other compassion and other love. So if it becomes really difficult for you, which it is obviously probably the case for most people when they're in a very difficult situation or when you're going through some hard time, then I would say focus first on your stuff, and then it'll just believe that it'll spill over to others. Um, okay, it makes you feel like you're not alone. You have support, companionship. That is lovely. Okay. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that I have so far. Did I miss anything, or do people have any other questions? Can feel free to raise your hand or speak up. Okay, very good. So let's move on. So I want to talk about the self, right? So far we talked about compassion that is directed to other people, but what about compassion to ourselves? Like the question that was asked. Um, and I think some of us, many of us actually, may have easier time having compassion and love for other people than to ourselves. And that's a really curious tendency that a lot of us have. And you know, when I lead sometimes sessions, people say, hey, like, it's so easy to extend loving kindness and compassion to other people, but I can't do it to myself. It's so hard. Um, so let's think about, why is that? Like, why is it so hard for us to sometimes love ourselves? And how does our self-concept affect how we view ourselves? and also how does traumatic brain injury may affect that as well. So, so it turns out that the idea of self, although it's kind of a confusing thing to think about, it is actually pretty straightforward and easy to map out in the brain. All we need to do is to put people in the scanner and then say, hey, is this object yours? Or we ask, hey, is this adjective describing you? And this is the brain that that tends, these are the regions that tend to show when people are thinking about themselves versus when they're thinking of something else. And this is a very, one of the most consistent findings in social cognitive neuroscience. We see this sort of midline structures light up, some of these social regions in the lateral view. So that's cool. These are the brain regions that tend to show up when you're thinking about the self. And the next question will be, how is that useful? Like, sure, like we know that now, that's really awesome, but how does that inform us in terms of how we think about ourselves and perhaps, in terms of self-compassion, how does that inform us in terms of how we love ourselves? So what we can do is that you can sort of think about these regions as sort of neural signature of the self. Okay, this is your brain on self, this is how your brain looks like, more or less. And we can look at different groups' brains, people who have certain conditions and look at their brain and see how this self-related signature look like in their brain and sort of compare. So for example, if you look at brains of people who are currently experiencing depression and anxiety, this looks slightly different. Their brain looks slightly different. I want to ask, like, do you think that they have more self-related activity in their brain or less self-related activity in their brain? Go like this if you think there's more, like that if you think there's less. Okay. Oh, interesting. That's a mix. I see a lot of up and down all mixed up. Okay, so what we saw is that there's actually more self-related processing in their brain. And it's almost as if they're sort of stuck in the self mode. And this is even greater when they're ruminating and when they're self-criticizing. It kind of makes sense, right? You're sort of stuck in the idea of like, so even when you're thinking about another person, you're thinking about how I interacted with the other person and you're sort of ruminating. So it seems like there is greater sort of stickiness in terms of the idea of self in the brain. Now, if you look at the brains of the long-term meditators, it looks actually the opposite. So they actually not only have lower activity within these self regions, but they also have the connectivity. So the way that their self in the brain is connected to the other parts of the brain is a lot more flexible. They're able to sort of move and connect with different regions of the brain a lot more flexibly. So it seems like they're almost like less stuck. This study, actually, I helped out this study and we invited really popular, like if you meditate, you may know these teachers. Like we invited this like highly regarded teachers to come in and they've been meditating like for 30 years, right? And they've been teaching, not only meditating, but teaching for 30 years. And we have them do this scanner task and the task that I told you about, how yeah, like, is this object yours, or does this adjective describe you? A lot of these long-term meditators didn't even understand the question. They're like, oh, what do you mean? Like, I mean, yeah, sometimes I am ambitious, but other times I'm not. Like, they had such hard time thinking about self as a rigid concept because their idea was so interconnected and malleable. And that was actually represented in their brain. Um, so there's separately more research on self-transcendence. The idea of self-transcendence really is about going beyond the boundaries of yourself, often in pursuit of greater purpose and meaning in life that's sort of beyond our immediate self-interests. And what we find is that the more people transcend themselves, the healthier and happier they are. So sort of combining all these results together, I think there is an interesting puzzle here. which is that overall, it seems like if you take yourself less seriously, or less, if you're less self-occupied and if you carry a lighter ego, it's they're happier and healthier. Having small ego tends to be associated with better outcomes. But isn't it the case that if you have a small ego, does that mean that you don't care about yourselves as much? Like, how is that healthier? So there's a little puzzle. And some researchers ask the same question. Hey, like, how does that work? If you think of yourself less, or if you have a small ego, how's that like healthy and how does that make people happier? So in this study, what they did was, hey, like visually, literally, why don't you it's a tiny little thing, but basically you can move this knobs around to make yourself bigger and smaller and say that, hey, this is your ego. How big is the size of your ego? You can sort of move these things around to indicate how big your ego is. And they define ego as like your sense of presence and influence in the world. How big is your presence and influence in the world? So they indicated their ego size that way. They also asked, hey, how much do you agree with the sentences? Like, my life is full of value, my personal existence is significant. I feel like I do matter. So same people did these two things. And what they found is that the size of their ego did not correlate with whether they thought they were important or not. So it is possible that, hey, my presence and influence in this world is tiny, but I still matter. I'm still important in my own way. So the size of ego and the way that you think about yourself as significant don't have to correlate. So I'm bringing this up because it's very important to recognize that you can feel small, yet significant. I think there's sometimes fear of self-love because people think that, oh, self-love is indulgent, it's narcissistic, it's, ego inflation. But feeling that you matter, that you are important, does not equal ego inflation. They're two very different things. So you don't have to have this huge ego, inflated sense of ego to love yourselves. And if anything, it's the opposite. So I want you to sort of point that out because some people have this fear that, oh, if I love myself, then I'm being really narcissistic. But really, that's not the case. I want to take a short loving kindness meditation break, and I also want to be mindful of the time. So I'm going to make it relatively short. Um, so let's just settle down a little bit and think about all this that, all the sort of foundational knowledge that we've built so far, and think about how they can transform our lives through this practice. So I like to encourage people to close their eyes if they feel comfortable doing this. If not, you can keep your eyes open a little bit. So let's do a quick 1 or 2 minute loving kindness meditation. Okay, so in this case, we're gonna invite someone to your space. Think about someone that the moment you think of them, you feel happy and you feel accepted. And it's not necessarily you're feeling excited, but it's more like you feel calm and you know that you are safe, that you have this sense of acceptance. It could be a person, it could be your pet, it could be some divine presence like God. And just invite that being in front of you. And imagine a gentle beam of light sort of emanating gently from that person's heart to yours. Just receive the light like plants receive the sunlight. It's abundant, doesn't run out. And every breath that you take, you're absorbing this gentle light of acceptance. All right. So that was very short. I wish we had more time. But hopefully that gave you a little bit of sense of rejuvenation and help you to sort of find your intention again. Um, so um, I want to talk about now specifically brain injury. I'm seeing some questions. Let's see. Thought it was notes for. That was so lovely. Yes, thank you. Let's see. Do some threats affect specific areas of the brain more than others? Absolutely. Actually, threats is one of the easiest thing to study, I think, in terms of emotions, because it's such a primordial instinct that we have. It's a very strong response. It tends to activate regions that we call limbic system. It's at the very root of our brains, in the center of our brain. Some people call it reptilian brain because it's such a very instinctive response. So yeah, that area tends to show up a lot. Um, what about the biomarkers, cortisol, inflammation, heart rate variability? Yes. Yeah, those are all very important bio measurements. A lot of times the ideal method will be combining all these measures together, right? So biologically, if you just look at, for example, your palm sweating, your skin conductance, when you're excited, when you're nervous, uh, your conductance looks very similar, right? So what's really important is that along with all these brain results, biomarkers, you want to also ask people, hey, how do you feel? What's your first person experience in this? So that's very important to combine all of that together. Do you know if these bold signatures correlate with EEG signals for these measures you talk about? I ask because if so, it seems EEG guided neurofeedback could be useful to help modify activity in the brain to make us happier and healthier. I think that's a really good idea, especially because EEG. So EEG looks at neural electric signals in your brain. And what Adam says, the bold is actually your brain's use of blood. So they're looking at different kind of measurements here. But I believe that I mean EEG is much cheaper and easier to study and carry around. There are lots of EEG devices. Although a lot of commercial ones, I feel like I mean as I used to do EEG a little bit too, but maybe I'm biased, but we take like, like 60 probes around the brain, but then the commercialized ones have like two probes. So I don't know how like good of the data quality that they are. Maybe in the past couple years it has been improved a lot. But that said, yes, it is definitely possible to use EEG signals for neurofeedback. And I think that's going to help people a lot. I've done fMRI version of neurofeedback, and it was really outstanding. These meditators, we look at this PCC, which is a brain region that has to do with self. We say meditate, and then the activity goes like down. We're like, whoa, how did you do that superpower? So yeah, that's and some people find out, wow, like I was doing it all along, like wrong. I didn't know that I was doing it right. So neurofeedback is a really wonderful way to use these results. How can we be part of the study? Thank you for asking. We do have a study coming up where we are trying to use compassion and loving kindness approaches to help people with brain injuries. It is we're still structuring the design and everything. But I will reach out to Kyla and she graciously agreed to circulate the information. So we'll definitely be in touch about that. All right. So does walking help brain health? Absolutely. Physical activity is one of the best, most effective strategies to help with your brain health. And so is meditation. We're actually learning that too. So thanks for asking that. All right. So that said, oh, do we have enough time? Yes, we do. So brain injury and self-use. So, um, let's think about how brain injury really changed the way that we view ourselves and our sense of importance. in the world. And I'm curious, how many of you experienced sort of not just physical, but psychological, emotional, relational challenges following brain injury? Okay, so I see a lot of hands. Yeah, it is not just physical, right? When we have these experiences, it is it sort of affects the whole person, right? Not just my ability for to be able to read, but it's also my relationship with other people, how I regulate my emotions. It's the whole thing. But the current sort of traditional treatment plan for brain injury, the main focus is really on pharmacological management and physical, occupational, and speech rehabilitation, which I'm sure you, if you went to hospital, that was the ones that you were encouraged to engage in. And there are really few existing interventions that are explicitly focused on psychological challenges. And that's why I think it's so wonderful for you guys to be part of this community, because I think this community is doing exactly that, providing this kind of social support and resources. But again, as we just saw, one of the most frequently reported challenge in brain injury is psychological. So how do we deal with that? And I think many of these challenges are due to our inability to care for ourselves unconditionally. If you think about it, so much of our identity is built around the feedback that we get from other people growing up, right? You get rewarded if you do something well, and you get punished if you do something wrong. And over time, day by day, what we're learning is that our self-worth, it depends on our ability, our performance, and our skills. So it becomes conditional. You know, people love me when I do something good. And when brain injury happens, it takes some of these abilities that were giving us this sense of acceptance and worth. And when those skills are taken away, we're sort of left in a space where we cannot find reasons to love ourselves. I love myself because I was such a active person, and now I'm not active. So I don't see any reason to love me. Um, and my identity was, for example, I was a postdoc, I was a researcher, and when brain injury happened, I felt like I couldn't read, I couldn't write. And those are the things that I was really, really good at. And now I have no reason to be accepted and praised by other people. I have no reason to love myself. Um, and this is a very natural sort of tendency that we can have. So I think it's so important to think about the unconditional idea of self-compassion. How do we rebuild this sense of unconditional self-worth? And there are many different ways of doing this, but cultivating self-compassion can be one way. Okay, there are lots of text here. I'll just read it for you so you don't have to read. But self-compassion is really about not necessarily changing your experience. You don't have to change your feelings. That can happen later. That happens sort of automatically later. But what you do is that you start having new relationships with yourself. You start having new relationships with your anxiety. Before, when you're anxious, you're like, oh my God, I'm anxious. Now it's like, oh, anxiety, you're here, come in, let's have a conversation, have a tea. You're having a friendly relationship with all aspects of yourself instead of pushing them away or being hijacked by it. That really is the core idea of self-compassion. You don't try to change anything. You accept them, you have friendly attitude towards all experiences that you have. Um, and we talked about how the self-compassion and other compassion tend to reinforce each other. So for that reason, there's more interest, and this is a very new line of study, more interest in what's called compassion balance. So the idea is that in order for your compassion to be sustainable, then you have to have similar levels of self-compassion and other compassion. So, for example, if you love others and you have a lot of compassion for other people, but you don't have a lot of compassion for yourself, and vice versa, if you love yourself, but you don't really love other people, that kind of imbalance has been associated with worse outcomes like anxiety and depression. So it's really important to cultivate both. So when you feel like there's some kind of imbalance, maybe that can be an indicator that you can choose what kind of practice will be most beneficial. Yeah, and I also want to take a few, like a minute to talk about what compassion is not, because I think there's a lot of misconception in the world. What self-compassion is not is toxic positivity. So again, toxic positivity is basically avoiding all the negativity and just sort of focusing on the positive aspects, right? And ignoring the other side. And compassion, we talked about the foundation, the compassion circle. It's really about embracing your whole humanity, good and bad, and having relationships with all of it. It's not about ignoring the negative experiences. A little trickier distinction here is self-affirmation because it's some self-affirmation is, I think, involves self-compassionate aspects. So self-affirmation it's about thinking about values that are important to yourself. So in the literature, it's more about, I value my family, I value my friends, that sort of self-affirmation in the literature. In the popular culture, self-affirmation sort of became something else, which is like you look at the mirror and I go, I am strong, I am beautiful, I am good, I am enough. I'm not saying that that kind of self-affirmation is bad. It can give you a little bit of boost, and if it works for you, great. But I think it can still lead to conditional love because there's a value judgment. When you say, I am strong, that means that, oh, those are good values. But if I'm not strong, if I'm weak, then I'm not good, right? So it's still sort of conditional because there's that value judgment of like, oh, beautiful is good, strong is good, and if I'm not beautiful, I'm not lovable, right? So I think it's a subtle we call it near enemy. It's not like a far enemy, but it's something that similar resembles self-compassion, but it really isn't exactly self-compassion. So we have to be a little bit careful with that. Um, So, what about self-love? At the highest level, it's a simple idea. It's about taking care of ourselves. We take care of ourselves with the respect and care and compassion, just like the way that we do for someone that we love. And then, like we said, a lot of people report that they have hard time doing this. And there are a couple of reasons as to why that might be the case. So we talked about the fear of self-love. Sometimes you think that, you don't deserve to be loved, or if you think like it's a narcissistic thing to do. So there is some level of fear sometimes. I think there's also lack of practice. Since we're little, we get plenty of chances to practice other love and other compassion. We are praised when we share, when we care about other people, but we don't necessarily are encouraged to care for ourselves growing up. And I think the culture is shifting a little bit. But sometimes it's viewed as selfishness. So I think there is some kind of fear and guilt around that as well. So we're gonna do some practice that's gonna help us be more comfortable loving ourselves. Um, so actually, there's a lot of questions. I kind of want to go through them before it gets too long. Let's see. I think that we can.
I think just chiming in, I think a little practice or something applied would be great. And then I'm actually keeping track of the questions so can make sure that we address them when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Kyla. All right, so I don't have much left. I'm just gonna go through it and then maybe we can do a short practice. But I just want to help you think about it this way. If you think about it, we all began as a baby, right? Unless you're alien, I don't know, we all began as a baby and if you ask a mother or a father, hey, like, why do you love your baby? I encourage you to answer it yourself too. Like, why do you love your baby? And most of them just say, I don't know, because they're my baby. They have no reason. The babies are not old enough to have done anything that makes them deserve love or anything, right? So they are just born and they're loved just because they exist. And we all have been a newborn. We're all loved, hopefully, unconditionally by someone at some point for being a baby, just by the virtue of being alive. So what changed, right? Babies, they deserve most people will agree, yeah, babies, they deserve to be loved. But what about that guy? Does that, guy deserve to be loved? What about me, a grown up? Do I still deserve to be loved? I think it changes over time. So why is that? What changed? And I believe that nothing changed. Nothing really changed. The kind of value that was endowed upon you at birth, it did not change just because of some passage of time. Just because some 30, 40, 50 years have passed doesn't mean that I'm valued less, right? So I think the value is still there. It's intrinsic. It doesn't go anywhere. But I think what changed is that I think now I should be the person who's getting the job done, not my caretaker, right? I should be the one who's doing the caring for myself. And I think people tend to forget that. You can think of it this way. So, from day one, you are given this beautiful baby, this beautiful human being, and your job is to just make sure that this person is nourished, well educated, and support them throughout difficult times. You should be this person's cheerleader, a best friend. You should be this person's parents and mentor. So you have to be the most important person for yourself. And really, it is a very active process. If you think about taking care of a baby, it's a lot of time, you spend a lot of effort, and that level of effort should be directed to you as well. And in this way, I feel like true self-love, when you are truly experiencing it, it might be when you feel like you're nothing special. I don't feel like I deserve it, but I still love myself. That is true self-love, that is unconditional. And I think when we realize that we deserve love, not because of what we have done, but because we exist, because of this value that's endowed upon us at birth, that is when we realize that we are truly unconditionally loved. And it's very difficult, and it requires a lot of practice. So how do we do this? There are many ways of practicing self-love and self-compassion, but one of the things that I want to point out over and over again is that we're really not born with all the skills to love ourselves. Sometimes caring for other people sometimes can come very naturally, but caring for ourselves, it's a skill for most people that they have to learn. Um, and there are some studies on this. For example, some work done by Dr. Mark Brackett from Yale University. They asked about over 30,000 people, and they asked, hey, did you have any non-judgmental adult growing up, someone who would just accept you unconditionally? And only a third of them felt like they had someone like that who would listen to them unconditionally. So we really didn't have a lot of good role models who would support us unconditionally. And those people who had those role models had about 20% more meaning in life. They felt like their life was more purposeful and meaningful. But if you think about it, even though we didn't have a lot of experience taking care of ourselves, we've done already a lot of practice caring for other people. So you can sort of think of it as think about one thing that I do for someone that I love, that I care for. It's not about indulging that person. I love my children and they want chocolate all the time, but I wouldn't give them chocolate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time. Compassion and love is not about indulging. But think about a couple of things that you do for your loved ones and start doing that to yourself. That could be a small start, and it requires a lot of practice. There are a lot of things that you can do that are daily practice. So we recently have conducted a study We have this mobile app called Daily Compassion, and it involves very short bouts of 2 to 3 minute practices. And it seems like it is associated with less anxiety, less depression, and better mood, and so on. So it is an emerging field of study that, maybe 2, 3 minutes a day, a few times, might still have some effects. I'm not saying this can replace traditional long-term meditation practice, can never do that, but I think it helps you to have that consistency, because sometimes you go to this meditation retreat and then you come home and you sort of stop, and you don't do it for a long time, and then you do these big bouts of meditation again, which it's still valuable, but I think having a consistent practice is also a key, because sometimes you're just tired, you don't want to do it. But 2, 3 minutes, everybody has 2, 3 minutes a day. So I think it helps you to have that continuity. Remember that patience is a form of self-compassion. Understanding is a form of self-compassion. If you feel like, oh, I haven't practiced self-compassion, that is the time that you can practice self-compassion. Like, oh, that is a part of me. That is still a part of me. Have him invite over and have a relationship with that feeling of guilt. That is your chance for practice as well. All right. I hope we have a little bit of time left for self-compassion meditation. Kyla, should we do it now or after Q&A?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it now.
All right. So let's do a quick, this is going to be a little longer, but let's have self-compassion meditation. So we don't have to, again, I encourage you to close your eyes here as well. And before we start, it's going to be easier if you think about a couple different versions of yourselves first before we begin. So I want you to think about yourself in the past, in the moment where you feel proud of yourself. Think about the time in the past that you have achieved something, that you have done something that made you feel really proud, when maybe you overcame a very difficult challenge. So have that version of yourself in the past. I also want you to have another version of you next to you when you are going through a very challenging time. So think about recent or remote past, maybe shortly after brain injury. And if you feel comfortable recalling that, feel free to do so. If you want to think about different times, that's also fine. But have these two versions of yourself available to you, the person that you are proud of yourself, and a version of yourself who's going through a very difficult time. All right. All right, so let's begin. Start with a couple of access concentration. I encourage you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. And take a couple breaths in and out. And focus on the sensations of your body, starting from your top of your head and sinking down like a very fine scarf is falling from the sky and going through your body. Filtering through. And I want you to now invite your past self in times of joy and pride. Imagine that person vividly in front of you. In times of pride and joy. And now you will wish this version of yourself well. You'll send well wishes using phrases like, may you be happy, may you be joyful, may be appreciated, may be loved, may be happy, joyful, may you be appreciated, may you be loved. Now let's invite our past self in times of difficulty. And we will wish this version of ourselves well. May you be happy. May you experience kindness. May you be safe. May you be loved. May you be happy. May you be surrounded by kindness. May you be loved. Now, imagine your current self sitting in a chair, growing bigger. You're physically growing bigger. You're growing and growing till you're big enough to hold your two past selves in your arms. Imagine that you're holding your past selves like two small babies in your arms. One is a happy baby, the other is a sad baby, and you love them exactly the same. Imagine lights of loving kindness surrounding all of you and spreading, filling up your room and spreading to the entire globe. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be loved. May I thrive and flourish. May I begin again as many times as it takes. May I be loved. Right. So when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. All right, so that is hopefully they gave you some glimpse of what it is like to love yourselves unconditionally. Yeah, so that's all I have. I just want to thank you everyone, and also have this available information available for any of you who might be interested in our research. Like I mentioned briefly, we will conduct a study soon that's going to involve compassion practice, specifically tailored for people with brain injuries. And we have some references for those who want to check out the original sources. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you are taking a moment to soak up the hearts and claps and lots of appreciation that's pouring into the chat, Yuna, and just really deeply appreciate you ending with a practice to help everybody embody even just like a little glimmer of the goodness that is so true in this group amidst all the challenges, really reminding us that we can hold what's hard and what's good together. So thank you for just such a wealth of information, insights, practices, and your skillfulness, especially knowing that you have the experience of brain injury and this has been such an anchor in your professional world and also personal, just adds another depth of meaning. So thank you. And for everyone who's here, big thank you again for being willing to explore this topic. And I hope you all take little micro practices into the rest of your day, whether it's patience. I love that suggestion, Una, or just feeling the sun on your skin. We'll send an email tomorrow with the recording, the slides, and also other links to the research that hopefully maybe some people might be interested in exploring more. So until then, please take good care. Reach out if there's any ways that we can support. And I know this is, yeah, both an ending and a beginning, and we'll see you all very soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, feel free to take yourself off by if you can. Otherwise, we will talk and see you soon.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. This is so worthwhile.
Thank you.
Mm. Thanks
Thank
for having
you
me.
so much.
Thank you, Melly.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are all amazing. Love you.
Thank you, Luca.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It was so great to be here and hear all the advice.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the opportunity to connect.
And thank you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
grateful to be here